Welcome, everyone. State Senator Brad Hoylman-Sigal here with my colleague, Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal. I represent the west side of Manhattan from Christopher Street up to West 103rd, and very proud to have worked with a number of our panelists today as the sponsor of the Adult Survivors Act in the State Senate. As you may know, the bill, which is now a law, created a one-year window, which closes on November 23rd, 2023, during which individuals can bring their abusers or the institutions that may have protected them to court, even if the abuse occurred many years ago. And before we begin, I just want to say thank you to Safe Horizon and Michael Polenberg for being here and for their dedication to helping us pass this important bill in the state legislature. I strongly believe we would not have been able to do it without your support and the brave survivors of sexual abuse who have shared their stories again and again to get this bill passed. I also want to thank my partner in the Assembly Member Linda Rosenthal, who I will turn to now. Linda.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Safe Horizon and Michael Polenberg, for your years of devotion to both the Adult Survivors Act and the Child Victims Act, all of which address harms that were perpetrated on innocent survivors whose lives were turned upside down and ruined in some cases. And thanks to Senator Hoylman and the legislation I sponsored, there is now a look-back window for people who were 18 years of age or older at the time of the abuse, and the statute of limitations was too short for them to file suit. Thank you also to Zoe Salzman, Kat Thomas, and Guy D'Andrea for your dedication, as well as experts and practitioners who help people bring their cases to court. You know, there are countless people who will be able to take advantage of this look-back window, some of whom may not even realize until today that they are eligible and that what happened to them was a crime. It wasn't just something they were negligent in stopping. And I think that's part of the essence of this. It's not your fault. Someone else perpetrated this on you, and the institutions that protected them, they're the parties that we have to go after in order for you to achieve some measure of justice. And that's what this is all about. I'm glad we're able to present this today, and I look forward to hearing the issues discussed, and feel free to ask any questions you have, and tell your friends if they can't make it, or anyone you know who might be interested. They can always contact Safe Horizon and get more information. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Hoylman and Assemblymember Rosenthal. You are such champions of justice, and you know, no matter what the opposition was to these bills, you kept at it until they crossed the finish line. So we are forever indebted to you for your leadership and your compassion and your genuine care for righting wrongs that have happened in our society. You know, both the Child Victims Act and the Adult Survivors Act are pieces of a puzzle of where the legislature has looked at the statute of limitations that exist for sex crimes, and over the years has made adjustments. The adjustments have been made because of an understanding that has broadened over time that it can be very hard to come forward in the aftermath of a sexual assault, whether it happened to you as a child or whether it happened to you as an adult. This notion that something bad happens and you rush to call the police and rush to call a lawyer and everything is tied up neatly within a matter of months or years just doesn't bear, it's not the reality that so many survivors face. Some survivors for sure have that experience, but many others may hold on to what happened to them for years or decades or longer. So in 2006, the legislature eliminated the statute of limitations for crimes such as rape in the first degree, predatory sexual assault, and a few others. In 2019, we passed the Child Victims Act, which both extended the statute of limitations for individuals who were sexually assaulted as children and created a 1-year look-back window, which was later extended for another year because of COVID. Also that year, the legislature extended the statute of limitations for crimes such as rape in the second degree, criminal sex act in the second degree, again, understanding that survivors would need more time. So the next piece was the Adult Survivors Act, which passed last year. And as the senator mentioned, it expires on November 23rd of this year. And that created a 1-year look back window for individuals who were sexually assaulted as adults, but were outside of the statute of limitations. So all of these important bills really had the same goal, which was to look at the laws, to look at the experiences of survivors of sexual abuse and realize there was a mismatch, realize that the laws on the books didn't give survivors enough time to come forward. The reason it can take a long time is trauma. Maybe the person who harmed them still has control over parts of their lives. Maybe it was a parent, maybe it's an employer, maybe it was a medical professional. And so what's important is to give survivors the time they need to be able to come forward. That's what the Adult Survivors Act does. That's what the Child Victims Act did. And we're so grateful that this opportunity now exists for survivors to speak to an attorney, find out what their rights are, find out what their options are, and make an informed decision about how best to go forward. So with that, I think it's time to turn it over to the attorneys who can explain a little bit more about what a civil lawsuit is, what are things a person should know who's contemplating bringing a civil lawsuit, and all of these other questions that folks might have. So I'm going to pass it to Guy.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Assembly Member Rosenthal and Senator Hoylman, for all your, as everyone said, your dedicated and tremendous work in championing this piece of legislation that was so needed for adult survivors. That the conversation has been indicated often goes and looks at child sexual abuse, and sometimes adult survivors get overlooked. And this legislation is groundbreaking, and so proud to be an attorney practicing in New York to represent survivors along with my colleagues, Kat Thomas and Zoe Salzman. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what a civil lawsuit is, because a lot of people have misperceptions, and a lot of people oftentimes view it in the sort of the context of what the criminal system is like and what it does to people at times. And I say this as 9 years I was in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office as a prosecutor. The last 5+ years I was in the homicide unit, and oftentimes my homicides involved an act of sexual violence. And so I get the criminal side, and I saw at times what it does to survivors and their families. And it can be a brutal system. And I'm not talking anyone out of it, but it can be a really challenging system to go through. And the difference, one of the significant difference that you'll have in a civil system, unlike the criminal system, is that you actually have an attorney representing you, right? You are the client. You are the one who controls large aspects of the litigation, unlike in the criminal system. The criminal system is designed to go after the perpetrator largely, and it is the state, the county, the city who has the charges, right? So it's the prosecutor going after the perpetrator, and the victim survivor is a witness. I mean, it sounds odd to say because it is your case, but not really, right? It's the government's case. In a civil lawsuit, it's completely different. It is your case. And so you work under confidentiality, attorney-client privilege with the attorney who you're working with, and everything you say to that attorney is confidential. So whether or not you decide to proceed, that conversation forever remains confidential. And so in the civil system, the attorneys do 90%, if not more, of sort of the work for you. In other words, your exposure, unlike in the criminal system, is much more limited, right? In the criminal system, you may have to appear before a grand jury, then you may have to talk to detectives and prosecutors, and then go to trial. In the civil system, very different. You'll hear from Zoe shortly sort of what to expect when you first go in to meet with a civil attorney. But after that, the attorneys will work with you sort of hand in hand to get everything done. Very rarely, if ever, quite frankly, will you find yourself in a courtroom. About 5 to 6% of civil cases actually go to a jury trial. The vast majority resolve one way or another well before it ever makes it to court. So rarely will you ever find yourself in a civil system. I mean, sorry, in a courtroom. And the civil system, in terms of thinking about largely who you can go after to seek the justice you deserve, oftentimes it is institutions, not always, but oftentimes the civil justice system provides justice against the institutions that allowed the abuse, the assault to occur, right? So think churches, daycare centers, boarding schools, medical facilities, massage parlors, when I say institution, I really mean a business, and that's what I'm talking about. And so a lot of times what we see is that these institutions, these businesses for profit, know that assaults are occurring, and it's more profitable, sadly, for them to not report, for them to allow the assaults to occur, to shuffle people around. And I'm not just talking about religious entities. We see it all the time in other entities like massage institutions, where a massage therapist will get shuffled from one location to the next instead of being reported. And so it's holding those corporations, those companies accountable for their actions or inactions in the face of these horrific acts of sexual violence. And the attorneys that you work with, whoever that may be, will walk you through all of that. And so I know there's going to be a question and answer, and we may sort of jump in and touch on some other things, but I think the initial expectations and what you should get out of first meeting with an attorney is a critical question that I know a lot of survivors have. So I want to sort of pass it now to Zoe, who's going to talk or walk you all through what that looks like and what you should expect from a trauma-informed relationship with your attorneys.
Thanks, Guy and Michael and Senator Hoylman and Assembly Member Rosenthal and Kat for doing this panel. It's so critical that we speak to all of you and tell you about this incredible opportunity that we have in New York right now. So as Guy said, I'm going to speak a little bit about what to expect when you first pick up the phone and reach out to Guy or Kat or me or another lawyer doing the kind of work that we do. And I want to say at the outset that we recognize that just picking up the phone to call us is an incredible act of courage and bravery. And when you pick up the phone to call us, you deserve to and should expect to be speaking with a lawyer who honors that, recognizes that, and treats you with dignity and respect and empathy. So as Guy mentioned, all of your work with a civil lawyer is covered by the attorney-client privilege. And that starts from that very first phone call or that very first email. Whether you decide to hire us and do a case with us or not, every single conversation you have with us, every single email you have with us, anything you provide us in terms of if you send us materials, all of that is privileged and confidential forever. So you should be very reassured about that right at the outset. So when you first speak with us, the first question we're going to ask you is, who is the perpetrator? And every lawyer needs to ask you that question right at the outset, because we need to do what's called a conflict check and make sure that there isn't any problem with our firm bringing a case on your behalf against that particular perpetrator. So you should expect to, right at the outset, have to identify who the perpetrator is. And we know that too can be scary and hard to do, but that's why we're asking that question. Once we've cleared the conflicts process, we're going to want to learn more about what happened to you. We're going to ask what happened, where it happened, when it happened, and how it happened. We're not asking these questions to offend you or re-traumatize you. Our goal is to understand the facts as best as we can so we can give you the advice you're asking us for. Do you have a case you should bring in civil court? And we know that there's no right or wrong way to respond to sexual assault. So none of those questions are designed to make you feel that way. It's again, just our attempt to unpack what happened. And all of us, Kat and Guy and I, often find it's helpful for survivors to prepare a simple timeline of what happened to them. the key events that led up to the assault or assaults, if there was more than one, when those assaults took place, and the key events that followed after. Doesn't need to be a super long document, but it can help for you. In many instances, this happened a long time ago. You, for all kinds of good reasons, don't want to think about that every day. You've buried a lot, you suppressed a lot, you haven't thought about it in a while. So it can help you remember some critical details to try to write it out like that. And it can help us as your potential lawyers quickly understand what happened. So it's not required, but it's something sometimes some people find useful to do. We're also going to be asking you about who you told about the assault, when you told them, and what you told them. And again, we recognize that, as Guy already said, the vast majority of survivors don't report their assaults to the police, to a lawyer, to any kind of official. And many of you find it very difficult to talk about at all. So again, we're not trying to fault anyone for you didn't speak to someone or you did. There's no right or wrong here. But many people do confide in a close friend, a spouse, a partner, a parent, a sibling, a therapist, a doctor, a priest. And if there is someone you've confided in, that person could be an important witness in a case. So that's why we're going to ask you about those people. Now, we don't want you to start, before you call us, calling up all the people who might be witnesses and asking them to be witnesses for you and what do they remember. Rather, you should be thinking in your own head who those people might be and maybe jotting them down on that timeline or in another note you're creating to speak with a lawyer. And then you can work hand in hand with us to decide who should we reach out to and what's the best way to do that. In addition to witnesses, we're also going to be asking you to think about documents and other evidence that might help prove the case. So what do I mean by that? First, we're going to be asking you, did you ever write anything down about the assault? We've had clients who kept a diary or a journal, who wrote a letter to someone about it. More recently, who wrote emails or texts about some part of it or some impact of it on their lives. I've had clients who wrote books or plays about their experience. Again, not everyone does this, and it's certainly not a prerequisite or required to have a case. But if you've done something like that, those materials can again be important evidence in a potential case. We're also going to be asking you about evidence that is about the assault itself, right? When it happened, where it happened, who was involved. And there you might have things you don't even think of, right? Some of our clients have saved articles of clothing, a dress or a pair of tights that could be subjected to DNA testing. Again, not everybody does that. Maybe you have a calendar or an old agenda that shows you went to an event on the night in question where you met the perpetrator or the assault took place. Maybe you have employment records showing you used to work for that company or that person, right? Maybe you have a ticket stub showing you traveled on that date to the place you say this happened. You might have photos or emails or gifts exchanged between you and the perpetrator over time. Because the one thing we know about sexual assault, one of the things we know is that the vast majority of perpetrators have some kind of relationship with their victims. The myth of a stranger attacking you in the dark alley is incredibly rare. Most perpetrators have a connection with their victim, a family, work, even a date or a friend, right, before the assault takes place. And evidence that proves there was such a connection can again be important evidence in a case. So these are some of the topics we're going to be discussing with you at the outset as we help you evaluate whether there's a case you want to bring in civil court. And we don't mean by giving you this list today to overwhelm you or make you feel like you have to gather this all up before you ever pick up the phone to call Kat or Guy or me. On the contrary, because there is such a limited window, it closes on November 23rd, 2023. That's this November, it's just a few months away. You should not wait. You should call us right away. You should not feel like you need to write a timeline or gather all the evidence or have everything tied up in a bow for us before you call. Call first, and then we can work together with you, as Guy described, to help you think through what is the evidence and how can we get our hands on it. So don't delay in calling us. I'm going to turn it over to Kat now, who's going to talk a little bit more about what to expect as the process unfolds beyond the initial intake meeting.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you so much to Senator Hoylman's office and Assembly Member Rosenthal's office for putting this space together for us to go through this. I know Guy and I, and I'm sure Zoe also has seen and heard from a lot of folks that still don't know about the Adult Survivors Act. So I really appreciate you creating this space for people to come forward with their questions. And as Zoe just said, you know, it is a short window, so please contact an attorney. I do want to follow up by saying that one of the issues, I'm going to talk a little bit, not just about the process, but some of the issues we've faced already when it under the Child Victim Act. So that's a different kind of window, a legislative window that's allowing claims to come forward, but the Adult Survivors Act was modeled after the Child Victim Act to create this window for any claim, no matter how old, so that you can come forward, as we've already explained today. But I just want to talk about some of the issues we've already faced. One being that I've heard a lot that people get very frustrated because an attorney may not be able to take your case. And because this is a very short window, we do encourage you to keep calling, keep trying to see if there is an attorney out there that can file and see what your options are. However, an attorney may not be able to take your case for several reasons. And that has nothing to do with you not being believed. It's nothing to do with you not having experienced what you experienced. There may be several reasons. It may be a situation where we cannot find a viable defendant that we could bring the lawsuit against. It may be that the case, based on the facts, it doesn't tie us to a court in New York. So there's several factors that go into our assessment, and litigation can be very difficult. I mean, another reason you want an attorney that's trauma informed, that knows how to help someone that survives that traumatic of an event, that can help and make sure that you know what's going on with your case, because litigation can be very taxing. And I know all of us here on the panel do often, if not always, encourage someone to get professional help, to speak with a counselor as this process is going on. Sometimes you're unearthing memories from decades ago. And so our office does a practice of making sure you're seeing a mental health provider that can help. You know, that's not what we are. We aren't a therapist. We aren't a counselor. So we do ask that you look for someone that can help you with that. And we often know folks that we trust that can help in that process. So I just wanted to address that. Another thing that we've run into with already bringing these cases forward is how long the process has been. Litigation is a long process in general, unfortunately. However, with the Child Victims Act, we had seen a big influx of cases, which we are so grateful that we've been able to get survivors to the courtroom doors. However, there was so much severe child sexual abuse, we know, across the diocese, and it was such a rampant issue in New York, which is why our senator and our assembly member brought it forward. They knew this was a severe issue. So there was an influx in the courts. The courts are handling it. We are moving cases, but it's just important that you know this is a long process. This is going to be a long process. So it's just, understanding that ahead of time. It's not going to be resolved like in TV shows or in movies. It's not like that at all. It's not going to be quickly wrapped up in 30 minutes. Another, well, I guess not an issue, but I'm often asked about if someone can be anonymous, a John Doe or a Jane Doe. In New York, there is a process to that, but that is something you need to let your attorney know about if you don't want your name disclosed. With the Child Victim Act, that was a pretty generally accepted that if someone wanted to be anonymous, we may have some extra hurdles as for adults to go anonymous, but it is important that your attorney does petition if that's what you want. There is a difference, and if people have questions, please, I won't speak too long about this because I know we want to go to a question and answer period, but one thing I do want to just discuss, and kind of piggybacking on what Zoe said about, when we ask you certain questions, it's not to re-traumatize you at all. But when we bring Adult Survivors Act cases, when you're an adult, under the law in the state of New York, our job will also, unlike for children, our job will also have to be to show that you did not consent, that there was a lack of consent to the sexual misconduct. So we may be asking you questions around the assault or the misconduct. And again, that's not in any way to say you wanted this to happen, that maybe you were in a relationship with the person. This is not in any way to shame you, but we do have to get certain information so we know what to do and how to prepare. We know that some individuals have a fawn response to to assault, fawn being that you almost appease your oppressor. You do things to get out of a situation. It's a trauma response. Yeah, you may even laugh or do something just to make the situation okay or normalize it. So we need to be aware of that and ask the facts, because we have to prove that there was no consent in a situation. With exceptions, if it's in a doctor situation, we don't have to show that there was a lack of consent if you're under the control of a doctor, if you're institutionalized. But again, these are all questions and issues that it's really, really important to contact an attorney as soon as possible so they can kind of guide you through some of these questions you may have and get the facts. Just in the interest of time, I think I will just turn this back over so that we could get some of your questions and hopefully be in a position where we can help everyone kind of understand the process a little better.
Looks like there is already 2 questions in the Q&A. I don't know, do you want me just to read them out loud? I won't say who posted them so we can keep everyone anonymous. I want to respect everyone's anonymity. The first one says, "Hello panel. Thank you so much for," and the reason I'm reading these for everyone, and I know not only the panelists can see the questions. The first question is, "Hello panel. Thank you so much for providing us with the ability to learn more about the importance of the ASA. My question is, since the ASA expires in November, is there ability to propose a bill that would rid the statute for adults? So essentially get rid of the statute of limitations for adults. And what is the capacity in which community members can partake in advocacy efforts that would support the proposal of that bill?"
I can try to answer first and then kick it over to Brad. Certainly we can propose any bill addressing this that we feel is necessary and needed. And we actually do have a bill on the child statute of limitations, but we can and will discuss applying it for adults as well. And certainly there are many, many opportunities to be of assistance in this effort. As a matter of fact, the reason ultimately that these bills pass into law is because of the strength of the advocates out there. And there are so many people who've bared their souls in order to advance this legislation. Even if it doesn't help their case, it's a community of victim survivors out there, and everyone tries to help everyone else. So, if you're interested, you can contact our offices, and you can also come to Albany, where we stage a lot of these battles, but certainly in the city, we do a lot of actions as well. But we can definitely discuss introducing something like that. Brad?
Yeah, and I agree with Linda. Really, having a 1-year look back window begs the question, why isn't it permanent? What do statutes of limitations achieve if really they only serve to protect people or institutions in positions of power? And at the same time, we're mindful of the fact that juries and judges need to have evidence that is reliable. But we've seen in the last several years with the Child Victims Act, over 10,000 plaintiffs, and with the Adult Survivors Act, it looks like hundreds at least, that juries and judges are able to sift through evidence and determine what's reliable and what isn't. So I'm a firm believer in that system. And I think I would be very eager to work with groups like Safe Horizon and their legislative team in advancing this concept. So more to come. I think Linda and I are both also aware that our colleagues want to, make a determination after the Adult Survivors Act window has closed.
All right. The second question is, if a victim of sexual assault files a civil suit against a perpetrator or institution without having pressed criminal charges, might that have a significant impact on the ruling, or I suppose maybe outcome of the case? I'm happy to give my thoughts real quick, and then, so I would say about 50% of the survivors that I represent, if not more, have not filed criminal charges. So is there a best case scenario? I don't like to put it that way, but I mean, if you file criminal charges and the perpetrator is convicted, it does take away there's not many defenses that institutions have. One of them is just flat out, it didn't happen, right? That is sometimes the perverse defense that the corporation will take. If there's a conviction, they're not able to take that position, right? So it's not that not having a conviction will hurt the case. It's just that us as attorneys have to fight that battle that we know inevitably a defense attorney representing a company, a corporation, or a business will bring, which is fine. We do it all of the time. And there's a whole host of reasons why people do not go to the police. Sometimes I've seen very significantly with individuals I represent in the transgender community, sometimes communities of color, for many different reasons, have a complete distrust of the system, right? So going to the police, it's incredibly sad. And I know that we need to fix that as a global scale across this country. But there is that mentality, and I get it. I saw it as a prosecutor, right? It's like, I'm going to go in, somehow I'm going to become the defendant, right? I'm going to walk in and somehow I'm going to be in trouble. And I'm the one who was just sexually assaulted, abused, right? And so we get that. And so that is not it will not, from my perspective, and I don't want to speak for Kat and Zoe, but I work very closely with Kat. I know she's going to share the same opinion to some extent. It will not be a detriment to us, right? I mean, it's just, because a lot of times you go to the police and they won't bring charges despite the evidence being overwhelming. I see that actually more than I see them, sadly, in this day and age, bringing charges. And so, I don't want people to think, well, if I didn't go to the police, these attorneys will never take my case because they're not going to believe me. That's just not the truth. So don't let that be a detriment for you getting justice. Again, the civil side is way different. And so sometimes for survivors, that is the right system. Sometimes it's both systems. Sometimes it's just criminal, right? It's really individualized. So Kat, Zoe.
Yeah, just briefly to piggyback on that. I have even been in court with the civil judges in New York. So in New York, we have our civil side and criminal side, and they are separate sets of court systems. And I have had judges shut down defendants who try to argue, but there was no conviction. And the judges flat out said on the record, counsel, that's a different burden. That has nothing to do with this case. We have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence. Our standard of proof is very different. Also, we're concentrating very much on the negligence of the institution. So that's our focus. I mean, as we've said, as Guy was explaining what who are potential defendants, it's important to us to recognize that so many institutions willfully turn a blind eye when they've had reports that this guy is not okay, that they've had patients come forward and said, look, I had a very intrusive exam, stuff went down, stuff happened, and we know there's been reports or there's been circumstances that have been created by the institution that's allowed for this kind of behavior to occur because they didn't have the proper safety standards in place. So as we were discussing before, there were federal convictions of a Dr. Haddon. And a lot of the survivors, a lot of us asked you, well, what about the institution? Like, what about the institution that had notice of this egregious criminal act, and they're not in the criminal, there's no criminal case against the institution. So that's why it's we're not as concerned. And on top of that, we know that here in New York, we've even had, unfortunately, our own NYPD investigated for failure to address sexual assault reports, criminal complaints when they relate to sexual misconduct. I mean, there's been a lot of investigation on this because compared to other crimes, sexual misconduct crimes are just not prosecuted equally with other crimes.
I totally agree with everything Kat and Guy have said on this. And I just want to add that I think we hear in the media a lot now, frankly, from perpetrators accused of this misconduct and their lawyers, that it's sort of a talking point, right? That, oh, they didn't go to the police, so they're not believable. But in fact, there's a lot of research being done on this, but the evidence strongly suggests the majority of sexual assault survivors do not go to law enforcement for a whole bunch of reasons that Kat and Guy have already touched on. So you are not alone in that. You are in the majority if you did not go to the police with your concerns, and the systems are really different, so it should not deter you in any way from exploring a civil case. So don't buy into that talking point, in other words.
The next question is, what is your phone number of your firm? So I figured Kat, Zoe, and I could put that in the chat. Unfortunately, it looks like we can't in the chat respond to everyone. We can only respond to host and panelists. So I know Sam's on here. I don't know if Sammy, if you could post that to the chat, each of our names, phone numbers, and firms, if that's easy. If not,
yeah, it's probably better that if anyone's interested to reach you through the web, we shouldn't probably facilitate constituents seeking out specific law firms, but we can certainly provide a list of attorneys that might be able to handle these cases without specifying any firm individually.
Sure. The next one is, if the assault did not happen in New York State, but I have lived in New York State for more than 40 years, can I file a case? Zoe or Kat, do you want to start with this one?
Zoe, I don't know what you would have to add. I would have to know more information. You would need to speak with an attorney just to really get all the facts, because there's, different, unfortunately, the laws everywhere, but these laws in New York, it is not straightforward. So no matter what, if not one of us, please do speak to an attorney, because we would just need to know a little more about the fact pattern. I don't know if Zoe, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You should speak with a lawyer and go through a factual analysis of your case, because there may well be a claim.
Yeah, and just to chime in, I mean, there would have to be, I absolutely agree, you would need more facts. There would have to be some legal justification to bring it in New York. So have I brought cases in states where the assault and abuse has not occurred? Yes. For instance, where institutions had someone that they knew was a danger, right? So insert Corporation X, they have someone who they know sexually assaulted another person or people, and then put them in another corporation or company or business out of state, and that person then does it again. And that happens to be the person who is not in New York, but they're in Pennsylvania, and the assault happened there, but it's under the same parent corporation. Well, there's a potential argument. We would have to really get into the facts, but circumstances like that could allow, again, under certain circumstances. I know it sounds very lawyer, we're doing lawyer speak, but it's true. I mean, it's very fact specific, but there absolutely are circumstances in which the abuse assault occurred outside of the state, but you are capable of bringing it within the home state of New York. Next question says, thank you so much for this opportunity to learn more about the Adult Survivors Act. How can a survivor hire an attorney if they do not have the funds to do so? Zoe, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So most of our clients, and I know I'm speaking for Guy and Kat too, do not have the funds to pay a lawyer by the hour. Lawyers in New York especially are expensive, but that's okay. For two reasons. A lot of these cases can be done on what's called a contingency, which is when the lawyer takes a percentage of what is recovered in a settlement or in a jury verdict. So if you get nothing, the lawyer gets nothing. If you get something, the lawyer gets a percentage of what you get as a way to compensate them for their time. And there are also some laws in New York that, our firm has been really active and litigating. We just did a big rape trial last fall using the New York City Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act. And that's actually a civil rights law that says if you win even just a little bit in court, the defense has to pay your legal fees and costs. So that's another way the laws have been passed to make it easier for survivors to access the courts. So don't be deterred by that. Again, call a lawyer, speak about your case. Each case is different, but the vast majority of clients can't pay a lawyer hourly, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, and in New York, one of the benefits of New York State and Jersey is very similar. The laws dictate oftentimes what an attorney can charge, because you'll see some attorneys in certain states charging 50, 60%, which is outrageous. I mean, it's completely outrageous. New York doesn't even allow that, which is a good thing. So, make sure, I imagine that anyone you go to hopefully will be following the law and the ethics that they swear to follow. But there is statutory requirements as to the maximum an attorney in New York can charge and what that looks like, right? Because there's two components to sort of the civil litigation funding, right? So the attorneys make their fees, right? That's the money they'll make if they're successful. That's the profit they make, right? That's for the work they performed. But in civil lawsuits, they're also very expensive, right? And so there are costs for experts for filing, just simply filing the complaint, right? Serving the complaint, which is the document that brings the lawsuit. And there's just depositions, which is the interview of the defendant's people on the record, right? All of these costs add up. The attorneys, well, in New York, you actually have the option to choose to pay that. I've never seen a client elect to pay the money for the cost. They rather have the attorneys front that money, which I totally understand. But they are costs that also have to be recovered if the case is successful. And so that's all broken down in the standard, what's called a contingency fee agreement in New York. It says, next question is, if the crime happened in New York and I recently moved to a different state, can I still start a case from where I'm currently located, or do I have to move back to New York? You do not have to move back to New York. I have cases filed all across the country with clients all across the country, not in the state in which we brought the lawsuit. So there are circumstances in which you have to come back to New York. But the way we do it is we make that a case cost, right? So if you're in California and the assault occurred in New York and you're living in California, and the defense attorneys won't allow you to do, let's say, your deposition, which is the question and answer portion, we would fly you, and most firms would fly you from California to New York for that limited purpose, and then fly you back, make sure you're safe, make sure you're in an accommodation that's clean, a nice hotel, right? And make sure that you're comfortable, prepared, and ready for whatever you need to do while you're in New York. But you do not need to live in New York to bring a lawsuit in New York.
I'm going to jump in really fast. Thank you for all that, Guy. If people have questions about law firms and how to get in touch with law firms, they're also always welcome to reach out to Safe Horizon. Our website is www.safehorizon, it's all one word, .org. Perhaps Sam can put my email in the chat. People want to get in touch with me directly at Safe Horizon, but we get contacted all the time by survivors when the Child Victims Act passed, when the Adult Survivors Act passed, of I don't know where to go, there's a million lawyers out there, how do I make a decision? So please feel free to get in touch with us and we can try to steer you. We can't guarantee that if we refer you to a lawyer, they'll automatically take your case, but hopefully we'll at least be able to steer you to attorneys like the folks here and others who have decades of experience doing these kinds of cases. The thing you want to try to avoid is getting a lawyer who's never done one of these cases before, but saw that this law passed and thinks it's a good opportunity to make money. You really do want to work with attorneys who know what they're doing and who are compassionate and trauma informed and good at what they do.
Yeah, Michael, I just want to echo that. Whoever you choose, even in the first consultation, look up their webpage, make sure they're trauma informed, make sure that this is a practice area that at least a portion of their firm dedicates themselves to, not moonlights, not does 30% right. I'm telling you, these cases are too difficult. They're too emotional. And it means I know too much to each of the survivors to have someone dabbling in this, right? There's a reason I don't do medical malpractice, because there's attorneys who are hyper specialized in that. And I would do a disservice to clients who would find themselves in a circumstance. One of my law partners does that. That's what he does, right? Find someone who specializes and is trauma informed, and their entire, not just them, their whole staff, right down to their paralegals, right? They also, in my opinion, need to be trauma informed.
Yes, and
Sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to ask another question. If somebody lives in Rochester, let's say, do they have to come to New York City to file a case, or is this option available across the state in different areas? Thanks.
Since I already have my mute back off, I don't mind answering that. Yes, this is a statewide law. So there are different, we call it venues within the state. So a state in legalese terms is our jurisdiction. We practice in the state of New York. That's the whole jurisdiction when you hear that term. Jurisdiction can mean several things, but that's where we practice. And then there's separate venues. So downstate here, where Senator Hoylman and I are, we're in New York Supreme Court, New York County, there's Kings County, as everyone likely knows. So there are different court systems, but using the example of Rochester, your attorney would know where they need to file, and that's based on the defendant. And then the only thing I wanted to say is, turning the subject a little, I do want to thank so much Assembly Member Rosenthal and Senator Hoylman for the fight. I was reading the transcripts of some of the hearings, and you all went up against some of the most victim blaming colleagues. I will not name names, but I mean, you really went up to bat for survivors. It is unfortunate that even in 2023, there's still this seems to be a protection of predators, or a protection of like, oh, what about these false accusations? Somebody's just going to do this. I tell you that Guy and I cannot name anyone that's called my office where it's been a false accusation or something that's just done out of, I don't even know, because I haven't received one. What it takes for someone to come forward and report sexual violence that's been perpetrated. I mean, it takes such courage. And I do just have to say, I know, because I was reading this transcript, Assembly Member Rosenthal, I just heard you having to go up to bat with you must have been rolling your eyes privately, but just some of the questions they were asking you, where it was like, what is this 1956? Like, what I don't why are we still here? So you're not alone. You're not out of the ordinary at all, what Zoe said, and you're in the majority if you didn't report it, and you just couldn't, no one was going to believe you. We get that. We really get that. So I just really thank our legislators for what they've had to put up with to get this law passed. So I'm thank you all so much.
Well, thank you. I think that we're nearing the end of our conversation, which has been extremely helpful, even for me to understand how an individual might pursue a case. Just one more specific point on the date. When do you suggest, with the date coming up in November, when would be the latest that an individual should contact an attorney? Do they need a little bit of a window themselves to prepare for a filing? I mean, one shouldn't walk in on November 24th, right, to a law office.
No, I mean, thank you for that question. It's a great question. Sadly, I've seen it in other states where I've practiced under windows. We will get calls the day before, 2 days before, and we can't take the case. And the reason for it is not that we don't want to. Some of these cases, I'm like, this case, we need to get this survivor justice. It's that for me to put the complaint together, we put a tremendous amount of work in drafting the complaint, verifying everything, doing checks on the defendant. 24, 48 hours is not enough time. And if we put that together and didn't do something right, or, we're putting our names out there as well, and we're certifying to the court when we file that we did our due diligence. And if we don't, we could be violating as attorneys our own ethical rights and rules and laws that govern us. And so it's just, and it does a disservice to the survivor. So I've done it within 2 weeks. I don't love that, but I mean, I think once you get in within that 2 week window, I don't know if Zoe or Kat disagree, but I think once you get in that 2 week window, it gets really difficult. And then my fear is you'll find a lawyer who will do it. But again, if someone's rushing to throw this together, I fear what will happen to your case and how the outcome will be.
That's what I was going to say. You don't want a lawyer who would file this case for you in 24, 48 hours, because like Kat was saying, we've all been saying, this is not an easy process from that first phone call all the way through until, if you are one of the 5% of cases that goes to a jury verdict, it's a hard process, and you want a strong ally by your side and someone who's going to carefully investigate, work with you closely, and prove a strong case for you. You don't want to put yourself through that and have a weak case. So even though it's really hard to make the first call to us, the sooner you make that first call, the greater the chance that we can take your case, and that you can spend the time, as Guy was saying, finding the lawyer that's right for you, someone you're comfortable with, someone you trust, someone you think you can partner with to do this journey. So even though it's hard, really sooner is better.
And for some, you may just be coming to grips with what happened, and that's not unusual. People bury this because it's so painful, and just talking about it sometimes, jogs one's memory. But if at all possible, go see an attorney if you even think there might be something, because I think, speaking to people who've filed cases, they just feel a sense of relief that finally what happened to them is being heard in a court of law. So, it's all a personal decision, but I think the advice of our attorneys here really, really is true and something you should consider.
Well, thank everyone.
I was just going to add, just on that
yes.
last point, to come full circle to where Guy began us, a big difference between a civil case and a criminal case is that you do control it. So as the assembly member was just saying, you can make that first phone call, do some work with the lawyer, and decide, you know what, I don't want to go forward, right? So that decision you can make right up until the day the window closes. But if you haven't been working with a lawyer, you'll run out of time. So you're much better off exploring the option, understanding it, understanding if you have a case, and then you decide, and you have the power to file the case or not file the case.
So everyone, again, the deadline is November 23rd, but we would urge you to consider your options far earlier than that, including contacting an attorney that you feel will represent your case the best in court. So again, Michael Polenberg from Safe Horizon has attorney suggestions. You can contact our offices for lists of attorneys. And of course, you see the names of attorneys here who have shared their time with us this afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Assemblymember, any closing thoughts?
No, thank you to everyone who's participating as well as everybody listening. And thank you for spending the hour with us. And hopefully your questions were answered. And all of us are here for any guidance you seek. And thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.